I drove through the city with the windows down, and my heartbeat steadying itself. The night air felt like permission to finally breathe without apology. My house lights glowed ahead like a promise earned through grit. The security gate opened automatically, as if recognizing the new version of me. Marble floors greeted my footsteps with quiet confidence instead of doubt. The home system welcomed me by name with warmth I never heard growing up. My phone buzzed with messages from my team celebrating our success. They believed in me before the world bothered to notice. They saw a leader where my parents only saw disappointment. I slipped off my jacket and let exhaustion fall away with it. Work waited upstairs on screens pulsing with real progress. Progress built from sleepless nights, fueled by fear and ambition. Fear of failing the girl I used to be. Ambition to prove she was right to dream big. My office window overlooked the river, reflecting a restless moon. That view was a reminder of how far I had climbed. A reminder that bruised knuckles still build empires. My assistant left a stack of reports on the desk. Numbers rising like proof that success has a pulse. A framed article on the wall called me a visionary. My father would call it exaggeration from desperate journalists. I closed my eyes and let the pride finally land. Not loud pride, but the quiet kind earned in silence. The kind you whisper to yourself when no one claps. Footsteps approached, and a familiar voice entered. Daniel, my COO, carried 2 coffees with tired relief. He grinned like victory, tasted sweeter shared. We talked projections, expansion, and the next leap forward. He said the team was buzzing about the funding milestone. I nodded like it was normal, but my heart danced wild. He asked if my parents congratulated me yet. I answered with a shrug that held too many stories. He understood, without needing the details carved into sentences. Some people just know where the wounds live. When he left, quiet filled the room with honesty. I walked past the framed milestones lining the hallway. Each achievement was a brick in the foundation I built. Brick by brick, with no permission slip from anyone. In the kitchen, the chef had left a small plate ready. Real meals became a possibility when life stabilized. I used to live on energy bars and raw determination. Now I tasted the luxury of nourishment earned. Upstairs, I changed into comfortable clothes and let my guard drop. No judgment here. No expectations crushing my spine. Only space spacious enough for someone like me. I lingered on the balcony, letting the breeze rewrite my future. The river carried away echoes of voices that doubted me. The stars seemed closer than before, almost reachable. I thought of my younger self scribbling ideas in cheap notebooks. She dreamed of building things that outlived the laughter around her. She dreamed of escaping rooms too small for her hunger. Tonight, I wanted her to see what her courage built. Every sacrifice had weight and meaning under the sky. For once, I allowed myself to feel the win completely. Success no longer needed to be hidden like a secret. This was my life, and I had stepped into it fully. Tomorrow would bring challenges sharp enough to draw blood. But tonight, I stood grounded in everything I created. This home, this company, this version of me, unshaken by disbelief. They told me I was an embarrassment. But here, I was proving them wrong by simply existing. Existing loudly enough that the world finally listened. Existing bravely enough to never shrink again. My phone rang in the middle of a strategy review, and the name on the screen froze my breath. Kai rarely called, unless something was breaking beyond repair in our family. His voice trembled like he was holding back a disaster too heavy for his age. He said our parents invested everything into some guaranteed return opportunity. Guaranteed is a word people use when they want to sound smarter than they are. The company vanished overnight, leaving nothing but debt and desperation behind. Their house was already at risk of foreclosure, and fear had finally made them humble. Kai begged me to help before everything collapsed around them. He said they were terrified and believed only I could save them now. The irony tasted like metal on my tongue and bitterness on my teeth. They once cursed my career and mocked the very world that made me wealthy. Now they needed the daughter they refused to respect when she needed them. I closed the office door so no one could see the storm inside me. I asked if they researched the investment or asked for advice. Kai admitted Dad refused guidance because he trusted his own judgment blindly. He said Dad called financial advisors parasites, pretending to know better than workers. Dad chose pride over reality until reality came to collect its debts. I shut my eyes and pictured the house I once tried to escape. The peeling wallpaper. The tight rooms holding even tighter expectations. The voices that said dreams were dangerous luxuries. Kai asked if I was there and if I still cared about them. My silence told him everything he didn't want to understand. Caring does not mean losing myself again to save those who broke me. I asked for the numbers and pulled up my financial calculator. Repayment timelines. Interest costs. Consequences built from years of disbelief. Kai whispered that Mom cried every night and barely slept anymore. He asked if I remembered the good moments from childhood. He forgot that good memories cannot erase bad patterns that still breathe. The guilt tried to wrap itself around my ribs like a snake. But I had learned how to breathe, even when guilt tried to choke me. I told him money is not the magic cure for generational stubbornness. They needed accountability more than they needed a bailout from the embarrassment daughter. Kai accused me of changing into someone cold and unrecognizable. I corrected him because clarity is not cruelty no matter who misunderstands it. I said I would consider options as a responsible adult, not a wounded child. He hung up with a sigh that sounded like disappointment sharpened by fear. I stared at the ceiling lights, counting my heartbeat back into rhythm. Daniel knocked once and asked if I needed anything. I told him just space to think without ghosts interrupting progress. He nodded, knowing family pain is its own kind of battlefield. When the office emptied, I stood alone with the quiet I earned. I wondered why success still felt like a scar when family touched it. My parents taught me survival by forcing me to outgrow their limits. Now they wanted rescue without recognizing who I had become. I tucked my phone away and focused on tomorrow's agenda. Work still needed me, even when family only remembered me in crisis. The city lights outside flickered like a reminder of where my loyalty belongs. I chose myself once, and it saved my life. I would choose myself again, even if it broke their expectations forever. Security called just as I was finalizing the new partnership agreement with our legal team. Their tone carried urgency, wrapped in polite professionalism, like a warning before the impact. They said an older couple was downstairs asking to see me without an appointment. I knew instantly who it was because fate enjoys dramatic timing more than fairness. I pulled up the lobby camera feed, and their image hit harder than insults ever did. My mother held a photo album like old happiness could buy forgiveness on credit. My father carried one of her homemade pies like sugar could sweeten forgotten wounds. They looked smaller than I remembered, as if life had chipped away their authority. For years, they towered above every decision I tried to make for myself. Now they seemed like cracked statues, begging someone to restore lost dignity. Security asked if I wanted them escorted out or granted access to the elevator. I hesitated long enough to feel the ache, but not long enough to act on it. I told them to deny entrance, because boundaries only work when enforced consistently. My mother's hand shook when she adjusted the album against her chest. My father scanned the lobby like someone expecting applause instead of judgment. He tapped his foot impatiently like he always did when the world didn't obey him. The pie wobbled dangerously, but he didn't loosen his grip even a little. Trying to fix every mess he created without ever admitting the mess was his. They waited several minutes before finally turning toward the revolving door. Their reflections shattered in the glass like fragments of a family no longer whole. I watched them walk away until the feed switched back to the security banner. My chest tightened like a memory trying to claw its way out of the past. But pain doesn't get to master me the way it used to. I returned to the conference room where the team waited for direction. Daniel glanced at me and read everything unspoken in the slight shake of my head. He picked up the presentation seamlessly because support doesn't always need a speech. During the break, a notification popped up from my personal inbox. An email from my mother with a subject line dripping with emotional bait. Please read, as if reading could erase years of being dismissed and diminished. I opened it later alone in my office with curtains drawn against weakness. She wrote about my childhood like nostalgia could function as an apology substitute. She mentioned the tree I used to climb and how I always dreamed too big. She called those dreams cute once, as though ambition was a temporary sickness. Her words avoided accountability, like stepping around cracks on a damaged sidewalk. No mention of screaming matches, disguised as concern. No mention of contempt, served at every meal. No mention of the night they told me love must be earned by obedience. She ended by asking if they could visit my lakeside home someday. The same home they mocked as proof I forgot where I came from. I reread the email not for sentiment, but for its flawless manipulation. Then I archived it without responding because silence is its own boundary. When Daniel returned with updated numbers, my eyes were dry and focused again. He didn't ask questions, because loyalty sometimes means protecting the pieces someone almost breaks. As evening settled the building, emptied, leaving ambition humming through the walls like electricity. I looked out at a skyline built by people who refused to wait for permission. Tomorrow would bring progress, and progress doesn't slow down for regret. I promised myself the little girl who dreamed deserves peace more than guilt. So I locked my phone away and stepped into the elevator without looking back. Some doors stay closed not out of cruelty, but out of survival. Rain tapped on the therapist's window like it was trying to join the session uninvited. I sat rigid with my hands locked together like a truce I didn't trust. Dr. Hayes waited for me to breathe fully before breaking the quiet with care. She asked how the surprise visit made me feel beneath the practiced composure. I wanted to say nothing, but silence carries truth louder than denial. I finally admitted anger still lived in me like a tenant refusing eviction. Not anger at the money lost or the chaos they created so carelessly. Anger that they only reached for me when they needed saving. She let the words settle like dust, finding the floor after a storm. Then she asked what would happen if they never acknowledged the damage done. The question hit like a punch I never saw coming but somehow expected. I pictured every holiday where doubt suffocated the joy out of achievement. Every mocking laugh disguised as tough love when I dared to want more. Every dismissal of my success like winning was just lucky timing or accidents. The answer came out small, but sharp enough to draw truth from the wound. If they never understand me, then I can finally stop trying to be understood. Freedom echoed in the room like a new language I was just learning. She nodded because growth often sounds like letting go instead of holding tighter. After therapy, I walked through the city with no destination except clarity. The sidewalk glistened, and the air smelled like endings and beginnings mixed together. My phone buzzed with an email notification from a magazine editor. They wanted to feature me on the cover for Women Redefining Finance. I stared at the offer like it was a mirror reflecting who I became. Someone powerful enough to choose which story gets told and which gets buried. Back at the office, the design draft of the cover sat on my desk. Me standing under dawn light, with the headline calling me unstoppable. I thought of how my father would scoff at the pride in those pages. His voice used to control my choices like strings attached to puppetry. But now, those strings were severed by my own determination to rise anyway. I touched the glossy print with cautious reverence for my own story. Ownership of success felt like claiming land long stolen by doubt. Later that night, the river behind my home roared stronger than usual. I sat on the balcony with a blanket wrapped around earned peace. The wind moved through the trees like voices encouraging bravery without apology. I opened my journal and wrote truths I once feared to say aloud. I am not responsible for healing wounds I did not create. I am not required to dim just so others feel comfortable beside me. I am not defined by those who refuse to see my worth clearly. Tears slipped out quietly because healing sometimes tastes like salt and relief. Not sadness, not regret. Relief that the war inside me was losing fire. A message popped up from an aspiring founder across the country. She thanked me for speaking publicly about resilience without permission. She said my journey made her believe her dreams were possible too. I felt something shift inside, like roots growing deeper into solid ground. I wasn't just building technology. I was building hope where others lost theirs. The moon reflected on the water like silver sewn into black cloth. I realized that life rewards those who refuse to shrink in the dark. I whispered a quiet promise to the girl who once begged for approval. You no longer need to impress anyone to deserve the world you wanted. Confidence warmed my spine like armor forged from every insult survived. Healing didn't mean inviting them back to tear down the new walls. Healing meant loving myself loudly enough that silence no longer scared me. I watched the night stretch wide with possibility, far beyond their limitations. And for the first time, I believed that letting go was not losing. Letting go was choosing a future that finally belonged to me. The next morning arrived with sunlight too bright for the heaviness in my inbox. My mother's latest message waited like a trap disguised as tenderness. She apologized without mentioning what needed forgiveness in the first place. She framed my silence as cruelty rather than self-protection earned in battles. She asked for a conversation, as if history were a small misunderstanding. I read every line with the steadiness of someone who finally knew herself. Acknowledgement was missing, like always replaced by sentimental smoke and mirrors. She talked about family like love could erase wounds still bleeding underneath. I drafted a reply with truth sharp enough to cut free the past. I told them their words shaped scars I carried longer than they care to remember. I told them respect is not negotiable and must be mutual going forward. I told them love should not require shrinking into someone they preferred. I reminded them success is not betrayal just because they did not dream it. And I ended with a boundary firm enough to hold under pressure. I forgive you, but forgiveness does not guarantee access to my life. No manipulation disguised as nostalgia would unlock what stability protected. I pressed send without trembling for the first time in years of conflict. Their reply didn't come immediately, and silence felt like a clean room. I called my attorney and asked to establish a trust on my terms. Monthly support enough for comfort, but not enough for control ever again. No direct contact required, because love doesn't need to be weaponized. It was compassion with a locked door, and key only I held now. Kai called angry, as if I broke promises I never made. He accused me of abandoning them when they finally needed me most. He said success poisoned me and turned me against my own blood. But loyalty to pain is not loyalty anyone should be proud of. I told him security is not the same as unconditional access. I told him I choose peace even when the choice looks cold. He said he no longer recognized the sister he grew up with. I answered calmly that he never truly saw me in the first place. That ended the call and left silence ringing louder than shouting would. Later at the foundation office, I reviewed scholarship proposals with focus. Young founders with dreams similar to mine before they were mocked into shadows. I vowed to be the voice that believes when families refuse to listen. A girl presenting a finance app for low-income workers trembled through her pitch. I smiled and told her the tremble is proof she cares deeply. She cried when we stamped approval on her grant with immediate funding. I realized impact multiplies faster when you stop wasting energy on convincing doubters. That night, I sat on my balcony with the lake reflecting calm strength. The air tasted cleaner, without guilt forcing itself into my lungs. I wrapped a blanket around my shoulders, like a reminder of safety. My phone vibrated with a new message from a young intern at the company. She said my story helped her ignore relatives, telling her to settle for less. She said she felt less alone because I chose myself openly. I looked at the city lights flickering like stars bent toward ambition. I promised to protect my growth from anyone who couldn't handle seeing it. Healing is not complete until you prevent the same harm from returning. Boundaries are love pointed inward after years of giving it away carelessly. I breathed deeper than I ever did in the house I left behind. The future no longer asked permission to arrive on my terms only. I had closed a door that once defined me and locked it for good. And the quiet that followed did not feel empty but finally peaceful. The auditorium buzzed with anticipation as I stepped onto the stage with steady feet. 5 young founders waited clutching oversized checks with trembling pride and bright eyes. Their futures expanded today because someone believed in what others called unrealistic or risky. I spoke about grit like it was a language carved into survival and ambition. I told them success starts the moment you stop apologizing for your dreams. Applause filled the room like a storm of permission, finally granted to themselves. After the ceremony, one girl lingered behind holding her backpack too tightly. She introduced herself as Mia and said her parents wanted her to be practical. Practical is what people say when their imagination has limits that scare them. She whispered that tech was her heartbeat, even if home treated it as rebellion. I remembered that feeling like the world waiting to see you fail first. I asked her to tell me her idea with the passion she hides from them. Her voice cracked, but determination poured out like a quiet revolution forming. I promised mentorship, and her shoulders relaxed as hope replaced hesitation. Back at the office, my team celebrated new milestones we once only dared to imagine. Daniel clinked his glass against mine and said this was just the beginning. He was right because growth no longer frightened me the way acceptance once did. Every wall we broke became proof that doubt is just fear wearing a suit. Later in my office, I reviewed designs for our new education platform upgrade. 1,000 more seats open next quarter for those chasing possibility without permission. The room felt like electricity poolsing, with potential bigger than any single story. My phone buzzed, but this time it wasn't family or crisis or manipulation. It was a teenage girl thanking me for the webinar I hosted last month. She said she enrolled in a coding course, even though her father called it foolish. She said seeing someone like me succeed showed her predictable futures aren't required. I realized impact moves farther when you stop begging to be understood first. I walked through the building observing dreams growing right in front of me. Young developers debated algorithms with fierce joy that made the future feel alive. A mother visited her son's workspace and asked questions with pride, not judgment. I paused to breathe in that vision of support I never had at home. Empathy rose like a tide, but not the drowning kind from the past. This was the kind that washes away doubt and leaves confidence shining through. Evening painted the sky with orange fading into purple, like victory settling softly. I sat on the rooftop deck, feeling the city pulse like a heartbeat I trusted. The girl I once was stood beside me invisible, but braver than ever. She looked at everything we built from silence and stubborn belief in ourselves. She smiled because we no longer needed applause to validate our worth. My phone lit up with Daniel suggesting dinner, to discuss the next bold move. Bold is no longer terrifying when fear stops steering the wheel of your destiny. I grabbed my coat knowing tomorrow's sunrise already belonged to our ambition. Legacy isn't what you inherit, but what you construct when no one claps. Healing isn't the final chapter, but the foundation under every new beginning. I unlocked the elevator and felt my purpose rise with every descending floor. Doors open to possibility, waiting patiently for those who refuse to shrink. Some might call this cold, but they mistake clarity for cruelty every time. I call it becoming the person my childhood self always needed first. Success tastes different when it comes without sacrificing who you are inside. I stepped into the night ready to design futures brighter than old expectations. Dreamers deserve space to run without someone trimming their wings shorter. The world expands for those courageous enough to keep walking forward alone. I built that courage piece by piece, and now it belongs entirely to me. No permission required. The lake reflected the morning sun, like gold scattered across calm water. I stood barefoot on the balcony sipping coffee, without a single tremor. No ghosts waited behind me, and no judgment hovered over my choices. The quiet no longer felt like punishment, but a well-earned reward. Every breath tasted like freedom, carved from years of stubborn survival. I looked at the skyline and saw a future still unfolding beautifully. The past could no longer reach me from where it stayed frozen. My phone stayed silent, and that silence finally felt loyal to me. No more apologies for growing beyond the limits they tried to enforce. No more shrinking to make space for dreams smaller than mine. I existed fully in the world I built from scratch and defiance. Success stopped being a shield and turned into a home that fit. The girl who once begged for approval now approved of herself first. I whispered a thank you to the courage that never abandoned me. I am not who they tried to define or diminish or contain. I am who I chose to become when no one believed I could. This story continues on my terms, without asking for permission again. Sometimes the greatest love is choosing the life that saves you. And I finally chose mine completely.